played the piano. Not like a concert pianist. She played as an accompanist. She accompanied the children in Sunday school. She played every Sunday morning for almost 20 years. And she played for our family at home. We would gather around the piano. She would accompany us as we sang together. We sang show tunes like Oklahoma and My Fair Lady and Camelot. And she, in leading us in that singing, implanted something deep in my being. And I tell you, at the drop of a hat, I will burst out into some show song. Of all those tunes, it was the overture that always stuck out. The song that was the main theme of the story. It became clear as you sang, and it was woven throughout the play. The main song was always haunting, focusing, energizing. It lets you know this is what the play is all about. Well, the Gospel of John has an overture. It's what we read this morning. And it lets you know what the whole gospel story is about. This story is about light and life and the Word and the world. And at the end of the overture, the crescendo hits and the big reveal comes. It is about grace. Grace upon grace. No matter what, whether the story is reused much at all in the rest of the story of the Gospel of John, this is a story about grace. If there's one religious word that has bridged the gap between the sacred and the secular worlds, it is grace. But what we mean by that word as people of faith goes way beyond what the secular culture means. The religious conception of grace is a word of power that overwhelms when we dive into it and see what it is all about. I don't think anyone has ever talked about grace more gracefully than the novelist and Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner. In his classic book, Wishful Thinking, he defines grace like this, and this is an extended definition. He says, grace is something that you can never get, but only be given. There's no way to earn it or deserve it or bring it about any more than you can deserve the taste of raspberries and cream, or earn good looks, or bring about your own birth. A good sleep is grace, and so are good dreams. Most tears are grace. The smell of rain is grace. Somebody loving you is grace. And you loving someone is grace. I mean, have you ever tried to love someone? Loving someone is grace. A crucial eccentricity of the Christian faith is the assertion that people are saved by grace. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. The grace of God means something like, here is your life. Here is your life you might never have been, but you are, because the party would not have been complete without you. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. I am with you. Nothing can separate us. It's for you I created the universe. I love you. There is only one catch. Like any other gift, the gift of grace can be yours only if you reach out and take it. And maybe being able to reach out and take it is a gift too. End quote from Frederick Buechner. Sometimes people really do have the mistaken idea that grace starts with us, that we have to be graceful. But Christians see it differently. We see that grace starts with God. In fact, the way we see grace is that grace is God's attitude toward us. It's a synonym for God showing God's favor on us, for God's love. It comes from God. It wells up in God for us. God's grace comes to us to bless us, to love us, to fill us with joy. And we don't do a thing to deserve it. And that is what Jesus means. Jesus means grace. The Gospel of John starts out, in the beginning was the Word, and it talks about life, and he was the life of the world, and the light shines in the darkness. The Word, this life, this light, it's all pointing toward grace. Jesus means grace, God's grace for us. As John writes, grace upon grace, which is to say a cascading grace, falling down upon us like rain, like never-ending rain in a Cleveland winter. It just never seems to stop. Grace is made real in Jesus. This never-ending grace elicits from us a way of seeing the world, a way of relating with the world. We cannot force ourselves to be graceful. We would just end up resentful. So grace starts with God. We see the light that we have been graced. We have been loved into existence. Grace does not capture us, it captivates us. It enchants us, and so it transforms us, because grace does not force us, but it does influence us. Therefore, we don't force ourselves to be graceful. When we feel the power of God's grace, it influences us, invites us to transform ourselves to be more graceful. In this sense, grace is a source of tremendous power. It's not a way to escape pain and suffering, but grace is a means of transcending pain and suffering. The grace that comes to us in God is the grace that comes even in the depths, the light that shines in the darkness. Luther followed Paul in saying grace by faith, that faith binds us to Christ. Faith is the connection, the relation, the unity with Christ that shapes our lives in that grace. But it all starts with God's attitude towards us, how God sees us and relates to us in this graceful way, embodied in Jesus. And as we accept that gift, we bind ourselves to living into that grace. By faith, we participate in grace, and grace becomes operative in us to shape us and transform us, to give us a sense of character and a sense of destiny, of where our lives are headed. My old theology professor said the universe is grace-shaped. It has a grain to it, like a grain of wood, and there is grace throughout if we but look for it. Grace is our destiny. In grace, we are free to do as we wish. And if we are in grace, we wish to live lives shaped by grace. Before we sit down to our meals, we say grace. Why? Because grace is what feeds us, preserves us, nourishes us, saves us. We say grace because we are grateful to God for the gift of our lives. Grace is not irresistible. It is possible to fall from grace because grace is persuasive and influential, not forceful. A grace that would force itself on us would not be gracious. And grace is God's gift. It's up to us to receive that gift. We have a tendency to want to prove ourselves, to prove how good we are, how right we are, how in the midst of our standing up for our causes, that our cause is the righteous cause. But in the midst of trying to prove how right we are, how good we are, we end up not being very gracious. Therefore, we cannot earn grace. Grace is a gift, the gift of God. As Paul says, while we were sinners, Christ died for us. We cannot earn grace. We can only accept it and respond to it. To respond to God's grace is to shape ourselves in ways, pardon me, to shape ourselves in ways so that we become people who are fully willing to love our enemies, to love those who disagree with us, to be graceful with one another. And the world needs people who can be graceful with one another right now. There was a Harrison Ford movie, I think it was 25 years ago or more, called Blade Runner. They just did a remake of it or an update of it, but the original one is the one that has captured my imagination. In Blade Runner, Harrison Ford was a policeman who was in charge of hunting rogue androids and terminating them. Well, one android, the chief villain, after a long chase through the pouring rain, the two of them are on the roof of a giant skyscraper. The android is standing over Harrison Ford. Ford is clinging to the edge of the building by just his very fingertips. And just as he starts to fall, the android, who has always seemed so robotic, inhuman, at the last moment grabs him by his wrist and pulls him up to safety and rescues him. As he sets him down, then you see that the android himself had been wounded, and he is about to die. In his last words, the android tells Ford that he has seen all these wonderful things, and that he did not want those memories to fade like tears in rain. And without ever saying the word, you realize that it was the seeing of all these wonderful things that had made this inhuman android human. And then, through eyes of faith, you realize this was a movie about grace. Grace does not force itself upon us over the course of our lives. It invites us to take our hearts of stone and turn them into hearts for love alone, to take our inhuman lives and make them human. And if we take grace seriously in the areas of our existence, in our personal relationships, our family life, our church, our community, our country, then we want to become people who create a gracious atmosphere where grace can flourish. That definition, creating a gracious atmosphere where grace can flourish, is one that came from a theological dictionary, and the author of that section in the theological dictionary was Randolph Crump Miller. He was my professor at Yale. And I remember the week when my grandmother died. I was supposed to give a presentation in class. I was the entire class lecture for everyone. It was my turn. This was supposed to be about a third of your grade, and I just didn't show up. And a week later, I showed up at his office door, very apologetic, and explained what had happened. And I said, now, when can I make up for this lecture I was supposed to give? And he said, no. It's all taken care of. And I realized when I read this definition that he didn't just write the words about grace, he lived it out in how he treated his students. So I ask you, who has profoundly sacrificed for you? Who has sacrificed their time, their money? Who has sacrificed their emotional peace or their own good for you? You did not deserve it, did you? But they did it anyway. That's grace. Who has forgiven you for what you have done to them? I mean, to tell the truth, you really stuck it to them, didn't you? You didn't deserve it at all, but they forgave you anyway. That's grace. Who has taken the heat for you when you should have been held accountable? You should have paid the price, But they paid the price for you with love. That's grace. Our lives are different because we have had all these people around us who have been graceful to us, who have shaped our lives in grace, who have, in ways large and small, embodied the gift of Christ that has been given to us. And through them, we feel the reality of the universe that is shaped by grace, grace upon grace. The name of this day in the Christian year is Epiphany. It's celebrated about the gifts of the wise men coming to the baby Jesus, but the real gift of Epiphany is the realization that we have been given the gift in the birth of Jesus. We have been given the gift of grace. The gift of God being born for us to show us again and again and again throughout eternity that we are loved. The grace-filled gift of Jesus, of God's giving God's own self that we may enter into a relationship with the reality that surrounds us. God has given us an aptitude for grace, an ability to be graceful, to be forgiving, to be loving. And whatever else we may say about grace, we circle back to the beginning. Grace begins with God. It is God's attitude towards us. It is God's action towards us. Grace is the overture song of our lives. God has given us the song, given us the tune. All we have to do is join the everlasting throng and sing our song, a song of grace that helps us to enter into God's reality. Amen.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click to donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.